The Horus Heresy, the greatest betrayal in human history, didn't happen overnight. It began with 20 superhuman Primarchs, each capable of conquering planets, and their complex relationships with the Emperor. These genetic sons went from humanity's greatest hope to its worst nightmare. Imagine the moment Horus turned against his father, setting the galaxy on fire. In this video, I'll show you how each Primarch ranks on the Chaos scale, from relatively stable to completely unhinged galaxy destroyers. You'll see how Horus became an arch-betrayer and why even loyal Primarchs couldn't stop the Imperium's descent into chaos in the 41st millennium. The Emperor's failed parenting experiment. The Emperor made one critical mistake when creating the Primarchs. He built them as perfect weapons, not sons. Imagine designing a nuclear missile without an off switch. These genetically enhanced soldiers were demigods with free will, emotions, and psychological complexity of actual human beings. The Emperor apparently skipped the parenting classes before starting this project. When chaos scattered the infant Primarchs across the galaxy, each landed on completely different worlds that shaped them in unpredictable ways. Angron was raised as a gladiator slave with a butcher's nails hammered into his brain. Conrad Kurz grew up alone in a crime-filled hellhole of Nostromo, where he developed a taste for flaying people alive after witnessing the planet's brutal justice system. Meanwhile, Rabut Guliman hit the jackpot by getting adopted by reasonable politicians on Ultramar who actually knew how to raise a child, teaching him governance and diplomacy. The Emperor clearly didn't account for how much their environments would override his genetic programming. The nurture versus nature debate gets settled pretty definitively here. The Primarch's homeworld influenced them more than their shared genetics. Leman Russ became a barbarian king because he grew up with space wolves, not because the Emperor designed him that way. Perturbo's paranoia came from growing up in a war-torn hellscape where betrayal was the norm. The Emperor basically created 20 identical supercomputers and let them install completely different operating systems based on where they landed. This divergence in upbringing led to their later chaotic behaviors, as each Primarch's environment left a lasting imprint on their psyche. When the Emperor finally reunited with his scattered sons, he expected them to function as a cohesive military force. That's like taking 20 kids raised in different countries with different languages and cultures, then telling them to work together without any family therapy. The Primarchs barely tolerated each other even before the heresy started. The Lion distrusted everyone, Fulgrim looked down on the uncultured Primarchs, and Angron just wanted to murder everything in sight. The only thing they shared was resentment towards their absentee father. The Emperor didn't help matters by playing favorites. Horus got showered with attention, while others like Angron and Perturbo were ignored. He gave Magnus mixed signals about using psychic powers, then punished him for doing exactly what came naturally. This dysfunctional family dynamic made the eventual betrayal almost inevitable. What's fascinating is how the Primarch's greatest strengths became their downfalls. Magnus's thirst for knowledge led him to make deals with Tzeentch. Fulgrim's pursuit of perfection made him vulnerable to Slaanesh. Even the Loyalists had fatal flaws. Dorn's stubbornness nearly doomed Terra, and the Lion's secrecy created lasting problems for the Dark Angels. The Emperor built superhumans, but forgot to include emotional stability or common sense. The tragedy is that the Primarchs could have been humanity's salvation. With proper guidance and actual parenting, they might have avoided their worst impulses. Instead, the Emperor treated them like weapons that just needed occasional maintenance. He never considered they might need emotional support, healthy relationships, or anything resembling a normal childhood. The Primarchs were doomed from the start because their creator didn't understand what he was making. The Loyalist who was secretly chaotic. The Dark Angels prove you don't need to turn traitor to be completely unhinged. Lion L. Johnson might have stayed loyal, but his methods were so extreme they made other Space Marines nervous. This is a Primarch who grew up alone in the chaos-infested forests of Caliban, fighting warp-twisted monsters for a decade before anyone even found him. That kind of childhood doesn't exactly produce well-adjusted adults. The Lion's idea of diplomacy involved orbital bombardments and secret death squads. His Dread Wing specialized in exterminatus-level weapons. the kind you break out when you want to leave no witnesses. While other legions tried to preserve human lives during compliance actions, the Dark Angels had protocols for wiping out entire populations if they suspected chaos taint. They had entire secret organizations within the Legion dedicated to hunting potential traitors. Picture a covert operation where a death squad silently infiltrates a suspected traitor's stronghold, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. This was a Lion's way. Their obsession with the fallen became a self-fulfilling prophecy. After Luther's betrayal on Caliban, the Dark Angels spent 10,000 years chasing down their own turncoats, often ignoring bigger threats to the Imperium. They'd abandon Allied forces mid-battle if they got a lead on a single fallen angel. This wasn't loyalty. It was an institutionalized vendetta that compromised their effectiveness. The irony? Their secrecy and unilateral actions made them look more suspicious than the actual traitor legion. Lionel Johnson's leadership style didn't help. He once killed his own chaplain, Nemiel, for disagreeing with him about using psychers. Not demoted, not imprisoned. Straight up decapitated during a heated argument. This from the same Primarch who later refused to explain his actions to Guilliman, nearly causing a civil war within the Imperium Secundus. The Lion operated on pure need-to-know logic. Except he got to decide who needed to know anything. His upbringing explains a lot. Spending formative years alone in warp-tainted jungles gave him a survivalist mindset with zero trust. When the Emperor finally found him, Lion had already united Caliban's knights and purged the planet's monsters. He didn't need a father figure, he'd raised himself. This made him fiercely independent, but emotionally stunted. Where other Primarchs sought approval, the Lion just followed his own rigid code. The Dark Angels' culture amplified these traits. Their knightly orders and labyrinthine command structure encouraged blind obedience over critical thinking. Initiates underwent years of testing before earning the right to learn basic Legion history. This created a force of hyper-loyal soldiers who'd follow insane orders without question. When Luther rebelled, half the Legion turned because their chain of command said so. Imagine a secret society where members follow orders without question, even if it leads to their own downfall. Even the Lion's victories backfired. His purge of traitor homeworlds like Chemos or Barbarous left these systems useless instead of reclaimable. His duel with Conrad Kurz devolved into a petty grudge that wasted resources during the heresy. In his final confrontation with Luther, it destroyed Caliban entirely, leaving the Dark Angels homeless and more secretive than ever. The kicker? The Lion might have been right about everything. His paranoia about chaos infiltration was justified. His brutal tactics worked, but his inability to communicate or cooperate undermined his own successes. The Dark Angels became so obsessed with hiding their shame that they created more problems than they solved. Angron, the walking tragedy. Angron's story starts with the Emperor making one of his worst decisions, looking at a broken, nail-ridden gladiator and thinking, yeah, I can work with this. The butcher's nails had already fried most of Angron's brain by the time the Emperor found him. These barbaric cybernetic lobotomies were wired directly into his skull, replacing higher thought with pure, unfiltered rage. They rewarded aggression and punished anything resembling calm or diplomacy, slowly killing him. Yet the Emperor's solution wasn't to remove them, it was to recruit them anyway. The real tragedy was the Emperor's callousness. Angron had been leading a slave revolt on Nuceria, fighting alongside the only people he'd ever call family. These gladiators, his brothers and sisters in arms, were more than just comrades. They were his newfound purpose. Instead of helping them, the Emperor teleported Angron away mid-battle, leaving them to die. Imagine spending your entire life as a slave, finally finding purpose in rebellion, and then getting kidnapped right before the climax. The Emperor didn't even pretend to care. He saw a broken tool and decided it was easier to take it than fix it. This set the tone for Angron's entire existence. While other Primarchs got to rule their homeworlds or integrate their cultures into their legions, Angron got nothing. The world leaders were forced to adopt the nails to bond with their Primarch, turning themselves into mindless berserkers. The Emperor wanted disciplined soldiers, but Angron's influence made that impossible. His legion became a horde of frothing madmen, incapable of strategy or restraint. The irony? The Emperor created the perfect weapons, then gave them to a commander who could only point them in a general direction and let them rampage. The nails rewired Angron's brain, making peace or diplomacy incomprehensible to him. Imagine trying to read a book with pages missing. Negotiation required patience and empathy, two things the nails systematically destroyed. When Lorgar tried to reason with him during the heresy, Angron's response was pure violence. He wasn't being stubborn, his brain literally couldn't process alternatives to combat. The nails turned him into a weapon with no off switch, and the Emperor never bothered to ask if that was a problem. Even his loyalty was a farce. Angron didn't side with the Emperor because he believed in the Imperium. He did it because the nails left him no capacity for rebellion. When the heresy began, he turned on the Emperor not out of ideology, but because chaos offered him an outlet for his rage. Khorne's embrace was inevitable. Angron was already a perfect fit. The world leaders' fall wasn't a corruption, it was an upgrade. Khorne didn't change Angron, he just gave him more skulls to crush. The final insult came during Angron's ascension to demonhood. Lorgar orchestrated the ritual on Usaria, forcing Angron to relive his greatest failure while the nails burned his mind away. Even as a demon prince, he remained a slave, first to the nails, now to Khorne. His reward for betrayal was eternal servitude to a god who cared even less about him than the Emperor did. The Red Angel became a mindless force of destruction, stripped of even the faintest hint of free will. Angron's fate was sealed long before he met the Emperor. The nails ensured he'd never be more than a weapon, and the Emperor's indifference guaranteed he'd never recover. Other Primarchs had choices, however flawed. Angron never stood a chance. His story was a brutal reminder of what happens when you treat people like tools. The Emperor wanted a general. What he got was a rabid dog that even chaos couldn't fully control. Magnus, who did everything wrong. Magnus the Red was supposed to be the smartest Primarch. That was his whole thing. The scholar, the psychic powerhouse, the guy who could outthink anyone in the room. Yet somehow, he managed to make every single wrong decision possible. His story is a masterclass in how intelligence without wisdom leads to fancier mistakes. The Thousand Sons were already in trouble before Magnus even entered the picture. Their gene seed was unstable, causing horrific mutations called the Flesh Change that turned Marines into writhing masses of flesh. Magnus saw this and thought he could fix it with forbidden knowledge. He started digging into warp lore the Emperor had specifically banned, making deals with sketchy entities that were bound to backfire. His heart was in the right place. He wanted to save his sons, but his methods were about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face. Then came the Horus Heresy. Magnus learned about Horus's betrayal before anyone else because he had psychic fingers in every pie. But instead of sending a message through normal channels, he decided to break into the Emperor's private webway project using his psychic powers. Imagine seeing your neighbor's house is being robbed, so you kick down their front door to tell them, while tracking mud all over their white carpet and breaking their priceless china. That's basically what Magnus did. His psychic warning shattered the Emperor's webway gate, unleashing demons into the Imperial Palace and ruining humanity's best chance at safe warp travel. The breach was catastrophic, diverting crucial resources and weakening Terra's defenses just as Horus was marching toward it. The irony is thick enough to choke on. Magnus tried to prevent disaster and caused an even bigger one. The Emperor sent Leman Russ to arrest Magnus as punishment, which, given their history, was like sending a bull to deliver a polite notice to a china shop. The wolves attacked Prospero, the Thousand Sons fought back, and suddenly Magnus had no choice but to fully embrace Tzeentch to save what was left of his legion. Every step he took to fix things just dug the hole deeper. Even after becoming a demon prince, Magnus kept making terrible decisions. He split himself into shards, lost control of his own legion, and became a pawn in Tzeentch's endless schemes. The Primarch who valued knowledge above all else became a slave to the god of lies and manipulation. His pursuit of understanding led him to become something he never wanted to be. a cautionary tale about why some doors should stay closed. The Thousand Sons went from being scholars to mindless Rubicae, their personalities locked away forever as punishment for their father's mistakes. What makes Magnus so frustrating is that he was usually right about the big picture. The Emperor's anti-psyker policies were short-sighted. The war needed to be understood, not feared. The Imperium's rejection of knowledge was holding humanity back. But being right doesn't matter if your methods turn you into the very thing you're fighting against. Magnus saw the problems clearly, but his solutions always made everything worse. It's like diagnosing a disease correctly, then prescribing poison as a cure. His relationship with the Emperor was another mess. Magnus genuinely loved his father and wanted to make him proud. But the Emperor gave him mixed signals, encouraging his psychic studies while banning the same practices for everyone else. It was like being told to run a marathon, but being handed a pair of shoes with no soles. When Magnus inevitably crossed the line, the Emperor's response was disproportionate and cruel. The punishment didn't fit the crime, but Magnus's crime was still very much a crime. Both father and son failed each other, but Magnus had the power to choose differently and didn't. The Thousand Sons paid the price for their father's mistakes. Their flesh change, cure, turned out to be a curse. Their homeworld was destroyed, and their legion was shattered. Many became mindless automatons, their personalities erased, while their bodies continued to serve. Others embraced the very corruption they'd once fought against. The few who kept their sanity, like Ahriman, became even greater monsters than demons they'd feared. Magnus's attempts to protect his sons doomed them to fates worse than death. Magnus's story is ultimately about good intentions paving the road to hell. He wasn't evil. He wanted to help, to understand, to improve things. But his arrogance blinded him to consequences, and his intelligence made him overconfident. He thought he was the exception to every rule, that his special understanding meant the warnings didn't apply to him. In the end, he proved that no one is too smart to be fooled, especially when they're fooling themselves. Lorgar, a special kind of stupid. Lorgar Aurelian had one defining trait that shaped his entire existence: an insatiable need to worship. This wasn't mere devotion. It was as essential to him as air. The Primarch who would become the architect of the heresy wasn't born a traitor. He began as the Emperor's most zealous follower, constructing monumental cities as tributes to his godlike father. The problem was, the Emperor didn't want to be worshipped. Imagine building a shrine to your dad, only for him to tear it down and call you embarrassing. This created the galaxy's most awkward family drama. The Emperor's rejection hit Lorgar harder than any physical wound. When the Imperial forces destroyed Monarchia, Lorgar's perfect city built in the Emperor's honor, it was more than just property damage. It was a spiritual crisis. The Emperor publicly humiliated Lorgar and his entire legion, forcing them to kneel in the ashes of their greatest work. Worship wasn't just Lorgar's hobby, it was his reason for existing. The Emperor should have seen this coming. You don't program someone to seek divinity and then get surprised when they treat you like a god. Lorgar's response to this rejection was spectacularly petty. If the Emperor didn't want to be worshipped, fine, he'd find better gods. His pilgrimage to the Eye of Terror was like a teenager discovering rebellion. Except, instead of punk music and bad tattoos, he came back with actual dark gods whispering in his ear. The irony is that Lorgar was right about the Emperor's divinity before anyone else. He just picked the worst possible way to prove it. His Lectitio Divinatus, the book proclaiming the Emperor as a god, would later become imperial dogma after his fall. The heretic wrote the holy book. What makes Lorgar's fall uniquely frustrating is how unnecessary it was. The Emperor could have channeled that devotion productively. Instead, he handled it with all the subtlety of an orbital bombardment. Lorgar wasn't some bloodthirsty maniac like Angron or glory hound like Fulgrim. He genuinely wanted to serve something greater than himself. The Emperor gave him nothing to serve except cold rationality. So Lorgar went shopping in the warp's bargain bin of deities and came back with the Chaos Pantheon. The Word Bearers' corruption didn't happen overnight. Lorgar spent decades carefully laying the groundwork, secretly converting hundreds of worlds to chaos worship, while pretending to still serve the Imperium. This was a calculated theological revolution. Where other traitor legions fell through passion and rage, the Word-Bearers' heresy was methodical. They didn't just reject the Emperor, they built something to replace him, brick by brick, sermon by sermon. Lorgar's greatest crime wasn't his own fall. It was corrupting Horus. The War Master might have been the face of the heresy, but Lorgar was a poison in his ear. He exploited Horus's doubts and insecurities, carefully guiding him towards damnation like a demonic life coach. The irony is thick here. The Emperor's golden sun was turned by the son he'd rejected. Lorgar proved that faith is dangerous, especially in the hands of someone who'd been scorned by the object of their devotion. The Laetitio Divinatus becoming the imperial truth after Lorgar's fall is the ultimate cosmic joke. The very book that got him in trouble with the Emperor would later form the basis of the imperial cult. Lorgar's writing about the Emperor's divinity were declared heresy, then centuries later became required reading. It's like getting expelled for writing fan fiction that later becomes school curriculum. The Imperium spent 10,000 years fighting the consequences of Lorgar's actions while embracing his ideas. Lorgar's relationship with his brothers was equally messy. Most saw him as weak for his devotion, little more than a preacher in power armor. What they didn't understand was that faith made Lorgar dangerous in ways raw strength never could. While Angron raged and Fulgrim preened, Lorgar played the long game. His patience made him the heresy's most effective architect. The other traitor Primarchs were weapons, but Lorgar was the hand aiming them. The fall of Monarchia wasn't just the destruction of a city. It was the destruction of Lorgar's purpose. The Emperor didn't just reject worship, he rejected the core of who Lorgar was. This created a void that Chaos was all too happy to fill. The tragedy is that Lorgar could have been the Imperium's greatest spiritual leader. Instead, he became its greatest heretic. All because the Emperor couldn't be bothered to give his most devoted son clear guidance. Lorgar's legacy is a paradox. He was both right and wrong in the worst possible ways. Right that the Emperor was divine. Wrong about how to serve him. Right that humanity needed faith. Wrong about where to place it. His story shows how dangerous blind devotion can be, especially when the object of that devotion doesn't understand what's being offered. The Emperor created a son built to worship, then punished him for doing exactly that. Fulgrim's downward spiral. Fulgrim's story begins with a foreboding moment, discovering a sinister sword in an alien temple and thinking it would be a fine addition to his collection. The layer blade was no ordinary artifact. It whispered to him from the start, preying on his obsession with perfection. Fulgrim's ego was already immense, and the sword knew precisely how to manipulate him. It promised him everything he desired, to be the best, the most beautiful, the most perfect Primarch. Fulgrim already believed he embodied these traits, and the blade merely had to convince him he could surpass even that. The Emperor's children were doomed from the outset because their identity was built on the pursuit of flawlessness. Their armor had to shine brighter, their tactics more elegant, their victories more complete. This was more than military discipline. It was an addiction. The layer blade amplified this hunger, making Fulgrim see imperfections everywhere, even in excellence. His legion seemed crude and unrefined. The sword whispered that they could be better, stronger, more perfect, if they just heeded his advice. Fulgrim's fall is disturbing because of its gradual nature. There was no single moment of sudden evil. Corruption seeped in slowly, like ink spreading through water. Initially, it was small things, longer meditation sessions, more time polishing his armor, dismissing captains for minor flaws. Then came changes to the Legion's training protocols, emphasizing artistic expression in combat. By the time anyone noticed, Fulgrim was hosting symphonies with instruments made from human bones and musicians high on combat drugs. The murder of Ferrus Manus marked a point of no return. Fulgrim and Ferrus were closer than brothers, calling each other "my brother" as a term of endearment. The Iron Hands Primarch was perhaps the only person Fulgrim genuinely respected. When the Lair Blade convinced Fulgrim to kill him during the Dropsite Massacre, it was more than betrayal. It was the destruction of his last tether to his old self. The demon in the sword had him completely by then. Fulgrim swung Forgebreaker with his own hands, but the will behind the blow belonged to something else. After Istvan, there was no more pretense. The Emperor's children embraced their new identity as Slaanesh's chosen with disturbing enthusiasm. Their pursuit of perfection twisted into something grotesque. Combat became performance art, victories measured in screams rather than objectives. Marines began modifying their bodies with extra sensory organs to experience the full spectrum of pain and pleasure. Their armor, once polished to mere brightness, became canvases for living tattoos that moved and screamed. The Legion that prided itself on discipline became a traveling freak show of excess. Fulgrim's personal descent was even worse. The demon in the blade eventually took full control, leaving the Primarch a passenger in his own body. It's deeply tragic to watch one of the most self-absorbed beings in the galaxy become a prisoner in his own mind. Fulgrim experienced every moment of his corruption, every terrible choice, but couldn't stop any of it. Even when he briefly regained control during the Siege of Terra, it was too late. His body had mutated beyond recognition, his legion was lost, and his soul was forfeit. The Emperor's children's fall illustrates how chaos doesn't just corrupt, it exaggerates. Their original traits weren't inherently bad, striving for excellence, appreciating art and culture, wanting to improve. Slaanesh took these qualities and stretched them until they snapped. Their appreciation for beauty became an obsession with grotesque sensory experiences. Their pursuit of perfection became a need to push every limit, break every taboo. Even their famous combat drugs, which started as performance enhancers, became tools for chasing the ultimate high. Fulgrim's final fate is the ultimate irony. The Primarch who valued beauty above all else became a bloated, multi-limbed snake creature. The Master Swordsman lost control of his own blade. The patron of the arts presided over a legion that turned torture into performance. Everything he valued was corrupted beyond recognition, and he watched it happen in real time. The demon that possessed him didn't just take his body, it made him complicit in his own destruction. What's especially tragic is that Fulgrim had multiple chances to stop the fall. The blade's influence wasn't absolute at first. It needed his cooperation. When his brother Magnus warned him about the sword's true nature, Fulgrim ignored him. When his own sons expressed concerns about the Legion's new direction, he punished them. The road to damnation was paved with conscious choices, each one easier to make than the last. By the time he realized how far he'd gone, the door back was locked. The Emperor's children today are a cautionary tale about how far you can fall when you don't set limits. They're not just traitors, they're addicts chasing the next high, whether it comes from pain, pleasure, or some ungodly mix of both. Their homeworld is a traveling pleasure barge that makes regular people vomit from sensory overload. Their recruitment process involves torturing aspirants until they either die or learn to enjoy it. This is what happens when perfectionism meets chaos. You don't get better, you just get worse in more creative ways. Fulgrim himself is now a demon prince, though whether much of the original Primarch remains is debatable. Sometimes he appears as a beautiful golden giant, other times as a monstrous serpent with too many eyes. His moods shift as unpredictably as his form. One moment he's composing symphonies, the next he's flaying people alive to hear what screams sound like in different octaves. The Phoenician who once valued control above all else is now the embodiment of excess without restraint. Mortarion's hypocritical fall. Mortarion's story is the ultimate case of become what you hate. This is a Primarch who built his entire identity around hating witches and warp magic, only to end up as Nurgle's favorite demon prince. His fall was hypocritical on a galactic scale. The guy who lectured others about the dangers of the warp now spreads plague and decay at the whim of a chaos god. Talk about failing the vibe check. His issues started on Barbarous, where he was raised by alien warlords who used warp magic to keep human slaves trapped under poisonous fog. One pivotal moment defined his hatred, witnessing a xeno sorcerer toy with a human life, leaving him with a deep distrust of anything psychic. When the Emperor showed up, Mortarion saw him as just another warlord using powers he didn't understand. The difference was, the Emperor could back up his claims with actual science. Not that Mortarion cared. His mind was made up. All warp users were dangerous. No exceptions. This stubbornness became his defining trait. While other Primarchs adapted their tactics, Mortarion doubled down on his hatred of Psykers. His Death Guard specializes in endurance warfare, fighting through conditions that would kill normal humans. They prided themselves on overcoming obstacles through sheer toughness. No warp tricks, no shortcuts. This worked great until they ran into enemies who didn't play by those rules. When the warp-based threats came, Mortarion's refusal to adapt left his legion vulnerable. The irony is thick enough to choke on. Mortarion feared the warp so much that he couldn't prepare for it properly. His solution to psychic threats was always the same: endure harder. This worked out about as well as you'd expect against demons and sorcerers. The Death Guard kept taking heavy losses against warp-based enemies, but Mortarion wouldn't change tactics. He was like a boxer who refused to learn how to block because he thought taking punches made him tough. His breaking point came during the Heresy. Trapped in the warp without supplies, the Death Guard slowly succumbed to Nurgle's plagues. Mortarion watched his sons suffer and die from diseases they couldn't fight through endurance alone. The final result? The only thing to save them was to accept Nurgle's gift. Mortarion had to become exactly what he'd spent his life fighting against: a warp-powered abomination. His corruption wasn't a sudden fall. It was the inevitable result of his inflexibility. The parallels to his childhood are painfully obvious. On Barbarous, he'd been trapped under poisonous fog, powerless against the warlord's magic. Now he was trapped in the warp, powerless against Nurgle's plague. Both times his stubbornness left him with no good options. Both times he had to accept help from something he hated to survive. The difference was the Emperor had actually saved him on Barbarous. Nurgle just made him part of the problem. His transformation into a demon prince was the ultimate humiliation. Mortarion, who prided himself on his endurance, became a bloated plague monster who couldn't die. His body, once a picture of grim resilience, now oozed with diseases he couldn't cure. His legion, once the toughest soldiers in the Imperium, became walking corpses who felt no pain but also no pride. Nurgle didn't just corrupt them, he made them a mockery of everything they'd stood for. The worst part? Mortarion knew what was happening. Unlike Fulgrim, who got tricked by a sword, Mortarion made a conscious choice to surrender. He watched the plagues take his sons one by one and decided damnation was better than failure. This wasn't possession, it was resignation. The Primarch who hated weakness became weak when it mattered most. The man who despised sorcerers now draws power from the warp every time he spreads another plague. His relationship with the Emperor makes this even messier. Mortarion resented the Emperor for stealing his victory on Barbarous by killing the last warlord for him. But when faced with his own impossible situation, Mortarion did the same thing. He let someone else solve his problem, even if it meant damnation. The difference is, the Emperor actually helped people. Nurgle just creates more suffering. Mortarion became the very thing he accused the Emperor of being, a tyrant using powers he didn't understand to control others. Modern Mortarion is a walking contradiction. He still hates Psykers, even though he's now warp-powered himself. He still preaches about endurance, even though his new form can't truly suffer. He leads a legion that can't die but also can't truly live. The Death Guard are trapped in the same cycle Mortarion was on Barbarous, enduring horrors they can't escape, serving masters they hate. The only difference is now they're the ones spreading the poison. His rivalry with the Grey Knight sums up the hypocrisy perfectly. Mortarion despises them for being Psyker Space Marines, even though he's literally a demon now. It's like a reformed smoker lecturing people about health while blowing smoke in their faces. The cognitive dissonance would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. What makes Mortarion's fall especially frustrating is how preventable it was. If he'd been less stubborn about warp powers, the Death Guard might have developed proper defenses against them. If he'd been more willing to adapt, they might have survived the heresy without turning to chaos. But Mortarion couldn't change, and that inflexibility doomed him more surely than any enemy could. Alpharius Omegon, the ultimate wildcard. The Alpha Legion operates on one simple principle. Nothing is ever simple. Were there one sneaky Primarch or two identical twins playing musical chairs with the same identity? The answer is yes, no, and possibly all of the above simultaneously. These guys made conspiracy theorists look like amateurs. While other legions focused on straightforward warfare, the Alpha Legion specialized in making everything needlessly complicated. Their battle plans had more layers than an onion, wrapped in enigma sauce. Take the recruitment process for starters. Most Space Marine chapters test aspirants with brutal trials of strength and endurance. The Alpha Legion preferred psychological mind games that would make a CIA interrogator blush. Potential recruits might spend years under deep cover before even knowing they were being considered. Some operatives died, never realizing they'd been part of an Alpha Legion operation at all. This was secrecy for secrecy's sake. Like a spy novel written by someone who'd forgotten the plot. Their actions during the Horus Heresy are the ultimate puzzle box. Evidence suggests they might have been loyalists pretending to be traitors. Other evidence suggests the exact opposite. Some accounts indicate they were playing both sides against each other. The only consistent thing about the Alpha Legion is their inconsistency. They'd sabotage an Imperial supply line one week, then tweak Traitor Legion battle plans the next. Their motives seem deliberately designed to confuse everyone, including themselves. The Primarch situation is peak Alpha Legion nonsense. Alpharius and Omegon were identical twins, a fact they kept hidden from everyone, including the Emperor, for decades. They routinely swapped places, sometimes in the middle of conversations. Important decisions might have been made by Alpharius, Omegon, or some random Marine they'd dressed up in their armor that morning. Their own legionnaires often didn't know which Primarch they were actually speaking to. It was performance art with galactic consequences. Raboot Guilliman famously hated working with them, calling their methods completely disorganized. That's like a chess grandmaster complaining about someone playing checkers with Monopoly pieces. The Alpha Legion didn't just break the rules, they played an entirely different game nobody else understood. While the Ultramarines focused on orderly campaigns and clear objectives, the Alpha Legion operated through dozens of seemingly unrelated proxy operations that might not pay off for decades. Their tactics were deliberately overcomplicated. Where other legions would deploy companies of Space Marines, the Alpha Legion might use 3 human operatives, a forged document, and a well-timed rumor to achieve the same result. Their battle formations looked chaotic because they were. Each Marine operated semi-independently based on partial information. The left hand literally didn't know what the right hand was doing by design. This made them nearly impossible to predict, but also prone to spectacular failures when their Rube Goldberg schemes inevitably hit snags. The Alpha Legion's obsession with secrecy often defeated its own purpose. They'd spend years setting up elaborate operations, only to have them fail because one cell didn't get the memo about a last-minute change. Their communications were so encrypted that sometimes even their own people couldn't decipher them. There are accounts of Alpha Legion operatives unknowingly working against each other because nobody had the full picture. Their greatest enemy wasn't the Imperium or Chaos, it was their own need to be the cleverest guys in the room. Alpharius' alleged death is a classic case of Alpha Legion ambiguity. Rogel Dorn supposedly killed him during the Battle of Pluto, but the circumstances are suspicious. The body might have been a doppelganger. Even if Alpharius did die, Omegon was still out there somewhere. Or maybe Omegon was the one who died and Alpharius survived. The records contradict each other so thoroughly that the truth is anyone's guess. When our Primarchs specialize in identity fraud, even their deaths can't be taken at face value. Omegon's fate is even murkier. Some accounts suggest Raboot Guilliman killed him after the heresy. Others claim he's still active, possibly leading the Alpha Legion today. There are even theories that one twin remained loyal while the other turned traitor, explaining their contradictory actions during the heresy. The only certainty is uncertainty. The Alpha Legion's entire identity revolves around being impossible to pin down. So, of course their Primarchs' fate would follow suit. The relationship with the Emperor adds another layer of confusion. Some sources suggest the twins received secret orders from the Emperor that differed from what their brothers were told. This could explain their erratic behavior. They might have even been following a plan too complex for outsiders to understand. Or they might have been making it up as they went along. The Alpha Legion thrives in this gray area where nothing can be proven and everything might be a lie. Modern Alpha Legion warbands continue this tradition of calculated chaos. Some fight for chaos, others against it. Many seem to be pursuing private agendas that make sense only to themselves. Their operations still feature the same hallmarks: misdirection, false flags, and plans so convoluted they'd give a Tzeentchian demon a headache. The difference now is that without the Primarchs' guidance, their schemes have become even more unpredictable. What makes Alpha Legion fascinating is that they might have been right. In a galaxy where the Imperium became a bloated bureaucracy and chaos is, well, chaos, their approach of constant adaptation and deception might have been the most pragmatic. The problem is that their methods made cooperation impossible. You can't build alliances when nobody knows whether you're friend or foe. Their greatest strength, unpredictability, became their fatal flaw when the heresy demanded their allegiance. The Primarch Power Rankings. After reviewing some of the Primarchs and their spectacular failures, let's dive into ranking them by their chaos potential. These rankings measure how each superhuman son of the Emperor managed to wreak havoc across the galaxy. From tragic downfalls to self-inflicted disasters, let's see who takes the crown for causing the most problems. First up, most likely to fall goes to Magnus the Red. This Primarch did everything wrong while believing he was doing everything right. His pursuit of forbidden knowledge was galaxy-breaking. Magnus, who warned the Emperor about Horus's betrayal, ended up causing more damage than Horus himself by smashing the Webway project. Being the smartest person in the room didn't help when his judgment was so flawed. His downfall was inevitable the moment he decided he knew better than everyone else about warp sorcery. The Thousand Sons paid the price for their father's arrogance, becoming mindless rubric marines or slaves to Zinc. Magnus gets extra points for being the only Primarch whose attempts to fix things consistently made everything worse. Next, most tragic has to be Angron. Unlike his brothers, Angron never had a fighting chance. The Butcher's nails were hammered into his skull before the Emperor even found him, turning a potential brilliant strategist into a rage-fueled berserker. The Emperor's decision to teleport Angron away from his gladiator family instead of helping them was a final nail in the coffin. Literally, Angron's world eaters became mindless killers, the exact opposite of what the Emperor wanted from his super soldiers. Even in death, Angron remained a slave, first to the nails, then to Khorne. His story is infuriating because every single person who could have helped him instead made things worse. The most self-destructive goes to Fulgrim. This Primarch had it all: beauty, talent, a legion known for discipline and artistry, and threw it all away because a demon sword promised him more perfection. Fulgrim's fall was a slow slide into madness, as a lair blade whispered in his ear. He murdered his closest friend, Ferrus Manus, turned his legion into pleasure-seeking freaks, and became trapped in his own body while a demon puppeted him around. The Emperor's children went from being paragons of perfection to Slaanesha's favorite playthings, all because Fulgrim couldn't handle not being the absolute best. His story shows that chasing perfection leads to ruin when you don't know when to stop. Most hypocritical is Mortarion, hands down. This is a guy who built his entire personality around hating witches and warp magic, only to become Nurgle's favorite demon print. Mortarion's stubborn refusal to adapt to warp-based threats left his Death Guard vulnerable when they needed flexibility most. Trapped in the warp during the heresy, he watched his sons die from plagues they couldn't endure. His solution? Surrender to Nurgle and become exactly what he'd spent his life fighting against. The Death Guard's transformation into bloated plague zombies is the ultimate irony. The legion that prided itself on endurance became unable to feel anything at all. Mortarion now spreads the very diseases he once fought, proving that hating something too much can make you become it. Most confusing are Alpharius and Omegon, the twin Primarchs of the Alpha Legion. These guys turn secrecy into an art form to the point where nobody, including their own legion, knew what was really happening. Their actions during the heresy make no sense because they were probably playing both sides against each other. Did they remain loyal while pretending to be traitors? Were they traitors pretending to be loyalists, pretending to be traitors? Their obsession with complex schemes often backfired when operatives didn't get the memo about plan changes. Even their deaths are questionable. Alpharius might have been killed by Rogel Dorn, or that might have been a body double. Omegon might still be out there somewhere, or maybe he's dead too. The Alpha Legion's entire existence is one giant trust no one meme made flesh. Honorable mention goes to Lorgar, the architect of the heresy. Without his pilgrimage into the Eye of Terror and corruption of Horus, the galaxy might not be its current mess. Lorgar's chaos came from his need to worship something, anything, with blind devotion. When the Emperor rejected his worship, Lorgar went shopping for darker gods and found the Chaos Pantheon. The bitter irony is that the Lectitio Divinatus, the book proclaiming the Emperor's divinity that got him in trouble, later became the basis for the Imperial cult. Lorgar proved that religious fanaticism is dangerous even when you're technically right about the godhood thing. His corruption of Horus set the galaxy on fire, making him indirectly responsible for more damage than any other Primarch, except the grand prize for most chaotic Primarch goes to Horus Lupercal. The Emperor's favorite son turned the most potential into the most damage. Horus had everything: the Emperor's trust, the loyalty of his brothers, the title of War Master, and threw it all away because of insecurity and chaos whispers. His rebellion turned the Imperium from a hopeful empire into the nightmare it is in the 41st millennium. The Siege of Terra and his battle with the Emperor broke humanity's future, ensuring the slow decline into superstition and brutality. Horus gets extra points for dragging half his brothers down with him. But pause for a moment. What does it say about power and trust when the one meant to lead becomes the greatest threat? His story is the ultimate warning about what happens when you give too much power to someone with unresolved daddy issues. The Primarchs prove a universal truth. Power without wisdom backfires. These demigods could have shaped galaxies, but had the emotional intelligence of teenagers. Chaos twisted their best qualities into weapons. Magnus's thirst for knowledge became recklessness. Fulgrim's pursuit of perfection became obsession. Even loyalists, like the Lion, let virtues become flaws. The Emperor created superhuman generals but neglected to teach them power's true handling. 10,000 years later, the galaxy still cleans up their mess. Was a real heresy the legacy of these superhuman misfits? Share your thoughts below. What do you think about the power and wisdom in this cosmic family drama?